Okay, welcome everybody. We're going to do a Friday afternoon stream. We'll see who jumps on or not, but we're going to cover some topics anyway. And if anyone's on in a little bit, then of course this will be Q&A at the same time. So if you have any questions, we'll do our best to answer them. And I'll keep my chat open here so that I can see this happening at the same time. Okay, cool. Okay, so we're going to talk about the various types of effects. And these, I say that pretty loosely because some of them may be called something a little different. But I think that these can be a little bit of a mystery in some ways. Some other DAWs handle these differently. And so if you've come from a different place, then you may not fully understand all the nuances. But I think it's an important thing to go over, especially for those of you who may be brand new in this world of Logic, and for those of you who've been around for a long time, maybe it's a refresher because every once in a while I forget where something is, and so that can actually be a little confusing as well. Okay, so first we have our main category split. This would be the audio versus the MIDI effects. So let's start with audio effects. Almost every channel, not every type, but almost every channel type in Logic can run audio effects. That means if we have a virtual instrument, like this sampler over here, once that sampler is loaded into its instrument port, then you can have it route through audio effects. So this one's going through a channel EQ, a compressor, and a tape delay. So 3 different audio effects that it's going through. This audio track here is going through pitch corrector, channel EQ, and Soothe 2. So it's going through 3 different things. A bunch of these are bussed out to bus 4, which is coming in over here and into a reverb. So 4 different audio tracks, it looks like. And then there's an acoustic guitar, timpani, some strings, and something else there. Are all going out through this one reverb. So we have the way to combine tracks into those. Cool. So a subcategory of these would be, and let me just go to one of these ones I'm not using. Once you click on one of these inserts, most of the time if you're working in stereo, this is a little different if you have surround sound or Atmos enabled, but just normal stereo production. Most tracks, if they're stereo, which you can tell with this little infinity type signal, that's just 2 circles overlapping. That means it's a stereo track, and so this would default to stereo plugins, stereo effects, and then you would choose either stereo or dual mono. Now stereo means, and let me do this with an EQ so you can see this. Stereo means that you're going to have one set of controls and it will affect both left and right channels the same. EQ is one thing that's a little bit different because on some of these you can process just the left or right only, or do a mid-side conversion and then process the mid or the side separately. But for the default is that you're going to be working on this. If I make a boost, it's going to boost the left and the right channels together. It's like locked together. Now, if we come into dual mono, then let's open that up. Then you'll see right here, we have a left and a right designator. So I can process the left channel separately, the right channel separately, or I can couple them together. And so I think with a coupling here, if I go to the right, then it's going to do both of them. So it's like we're using the other, but sometimes this is a bigger difference, like with the compressor, which has a key input and it does an analysis. You want it to be analyzed off the entire stereo track most of the time. And so then do the settings, and this one still runs them independently even though you can couple them together. Cool. And I did see your comment, Amir, about doing a video on sidechain gating a synth to an entire song. If you have a video with a good example, I mean, sure, I'd love to. We could do a video for that. I've done several videos in the past about sidechaining. I think it's a really interesting topic. I use it all the time, but and in fact, we're going to look at sidechaining in just a few minutes with one of the types of effects. So let me keep on going here. But if you had, like you said, an example or something, you can definitely pull my email address off of my profile of my channel. The other thing then with this, and let me pull this above all the effects, because technically speaking, if you have a mono audio track, which is designated by the little circle next to the input, and then you go down in here, some of these effects, let me see if any of these are already. So they're mono right now. They just show up as mono, but you could do a mono to stereo and then convert the signal to stereo partway through the channel strip. And so if I did this, and then everything after it would be stereo, and everything before it would still be mono. So you can actually have a conversion of mono to stereo on a channel strip among the inserts. So you got to be a little cognizant of that in some situations. But otherwise, you're just going to have the mono option, and then in some cases, the mono to stereo. Like channel EQ, there's nothing that's going to stereoify the sound. Same with those, but reverb would for sure. And some of these might. The pedal board, yes. Delay designer could for sure. It has stereo components in its effect, and so forth. And so those are the two main, or the main categories of audio effects that we're looking at. We're really talking about channel options and routing rather than anything else right now with that. The next type then would be MIDI effect. And these happen on instrument channels pretty much exclusively. And so I have one instrument channel on this particular project. Although, I mean, I have other ones actually, and that's not true. I don't just have one. I just have one MIDI effect loaded. But I have, for instance, my retro synth and the bass, an acoustic guitar. So on this one, I have an arpeggiator loaded. And the MIDI is essentially routed from up here in our main window in the on our tracks area. And that MIDI, in this case, looks like this. They're chords, and then it's going through, let me load this up, an arpeggiator, which is changing that MIDI, and then that actually triggers the sampler sound. So the MIDI starts here up as a region, goes through the MIDI effects, through the instrument, triggers the instrument, then goes through the audio effects, and then down through the faders. So the original here would sound, let me solo all of this out and turn off the MIDI effect for a second. Push play. And then let's turn on that arpeggiator again. So it leaves the original MIDI untouched, but we're hearing it through the arpeggiator. So it's a signal chain thing that you want to know where the signal is flowing. In this case, not an audio signal, but MIDI, until it gets to the instrument track, and then it continues on. And so we have a number of built-in ones: arpeggiator, chord trigger, modifier, modulator, note repeater, randomizer, scripter, transposer, velocity processor. And then you can get third-party audio unit MIDI effects. This is a format that's published. So like Reason Studios, there's the Reason Rack plugin, and we could be using that on here. I mean, there's a few things that they have which are kind of cool. And then I have the MiFi, the MI Rack MIDI which is like a synth engine, and it has some MIDI effects in there that you can use. So the MIDI goes through those, gets processed, and then sent out. Now, one distinguishing thing here that sometimes makes a difference would be, for instance, you have to understand how it's working in order to decide which one is the right one to use. So, for instance, let me come down into maybe the Liverpool bass, or I don't think there's some strings there. Oh, the brass section. We'll stay with the piano for a second. So say the piano part that I played was uneven in terms of my note trigger. Maybe I pushed one finger just a little faster and it had a higher velocity, and so the note triggered out a little bit more. You can see my notes. There's not too many of those. In fact, there is like a couple. A little bit more, but not much. But say that there was a note in here that was, outrageously louder. We could edit it with our mouse keyboard. We could use some sort of quantization to alter that with MIDI. We could also come through and use, for instance, our velocity processor MIDI effect, which is like a compressor. And this has a threshold for MIDI note value. So it goes from 1 to 127. I guess it wouldn't go down to 0 just because that wouldn't have any velocity. But we set a threshold and a ratio, and every time it goes above the threshold, the ratio adjusts that velocity back down, and then we have a makeup section, very much like a compressor. In fact, we have we can do other things that are similar to that as well. We can process the note on or note off. I don't know if there's anything. Yeah, so the minimum note range. So this is kind of a similar thing that we have in compression as well, mostly with MIDI. But we can adjust the performance as it goes through before it hits the instrument, or after it goes to the virtual instrument. We can put a compressor on the channel like I have here. So this is a compression tool for that piano. Now I believe this is, I probably just loaded up the Steinway Grand Piano preset in Logic, and it pulled open the EQ, compressor, and tape delay as a part of its preset. I don't think I actually added those on. This is like a minor player on this song. It's just in the background. It's more of a texture than it is something that's really going to be sticking out. And so with this, I have to decide, should I use the velocity processor MIDI effect or the compressor on the piano afterwards? And what's the difference? The main difference is that the MIDI can trigger different samples if I use the velocity processor before it triggers the samples. And afterwards, the compressor just turns everything up and down, but the original samples are still the same ones that get triggered either way. So if I hit a note really hard, right now it's not going to go very loud because I have the velocity processor in there. But if I hit it really loud and it was like a red note on my piano roll, then it's going to trigger a different sample level inside the piano. So let me show you that real quick just so you can visualize it. Here's my sampler. Let's do mapping. Let me turn off the arpeggiator. There's like a little ringing right there. You hear that? So that additional ringing sound, that's part of that recording in zone 8 right there, is going to be there if I have that note triggered and just use a compression tool later. But if I use the velocity processor, it's going to pull it down into one of the other ones that are lower. And so it'll sound like the piano is being played softer instead of playing louder and then compressed down. There's a big distinction there that you'll only really notice when you notice it. So sometimes you could do it either way and have fine results, and sometimes you're going to be like, wow, that's a weird sounding sample. And so then you have to, switch out your MIDI instead of using a compression tool. Okay, cool. So all of these process the MIDI in real time, just like the audio effects process the audio in real time. And then you end up mixing all together and you export your project and it all gets rendered into the final version. And so there's a big distinction. Now there's a few other things to still think about when it comes to effects. One of them is a type of effect which I think is probably more misunderstood by the average user. Now, if you're watching this and you say, "Oh yeah, I know all about that," that's great. It means you're learning your tools and you know them really well. But that's not going to be the case for every single person. But let's do a new software track right up here at the top, and under the instrument area. And I like that Logic finally, I think that originally this was just under like the input rather than in a separate area or called instrument. They've definitely fine-tuned some of the areas where you add things from the early days. But this one, we have all of our recent instruments and all of our Logic instruments. And then we have our AU generators. And we have our AU instruments, which are all the third-party things like Reason and Moog and Image Line, East West, all of the things that I don't use too many third-party things, but I certainly do use those ones. And then we have this thing called AU MIDI-controlled effects. So if you have an effect which can accept MIDI data as a part of what it does, you have to load it in the instrument slot. It's totally stupid because there would be a lot of better ways to do this, but this is the way we've been given for now. I hope this is eventually changed at the same time that they add MIDI effect type capabilities to all tracks in Logic. I'm convinced that this is something that will be coming in the near future because the people who make Logic, they're not dumb. I mean, they've got to know that this is stuff that would be useful, but you never know. So, for instance, Eventide. Let's do something with the let's see. We'll do Octavox maybe. Okay, cool. This is like a harmonizer type effect. It's very good. Eventide makes great things. They've been doing vocal pitch changing for a long time. And if you want to be able to play this or, have a live input of a voice and be able to play a chord on your keyboard, then this is the way to do it. So we set MIDI control to routed, pitch tracking to on, and then I believe if I play a chord, you'll see all those notes changing. Let's go up a higher one. I'm just going to play one. If I play less than there are, it repeats it, but if I play all of the notes, then it will just do as many have been programmed out. So then you sing something and it'll go through and it'll be harmonized into those notes. Okay, that seems real useful. The problem is this is now the input on this track. And so that becomes an issue. Now, at the risk of crashing everything, because I'm live streaming, and if I crash, then you'll just have learned everything you need to learn. But I'm going to do a live input into this using the sidechain. So this is how we get sound routed into the effects that need to be in the instrument slot because they're MIDI controlled, but they're not a sound source in and of themselves. So for instance, I could sidechain off of an audio track. Here are all my audio tracks. I could do this off of I just lost my screen. Oh, there we go. Live inputs. I could do this off instrument tracks, or I could do it off buses. So I could bus something to this. So those are the 4 things. Let's try this off of a live input, and we'll see just how bad this is. Check. I don't know if I can't hear. Let's see. Can I hear anything? Nope. Check, check. No, I think that because... Oh, there's something. Hold on, sorry. Okay, so that might have been fun for some of you. I apologize. Looked like we had a little feedback loop and some low frequencies. And I turned off my streaming. So yeah, not a good example. But you get the idea. Hopefully that wasn't too crazy for anybody. I'll listen back before I publish this live in case anyone's watching this later. But that's how we have to do this. So with this type of effect, the MIDI controlled effects, you load them in instrument tracks, and then you bring in whatever audio or other stuff using the sidechain. And then you have to choose which sidechain thing there you want. I'm pretty sure it's because those notes are so low. I wonder... I think I can turn my streaming sound back on. Oof. Check, check. Let me try this. It's still turned all the way down, so I can't hurt anything. I mean, I can definitely hurt something. Check. Check 1, 2. Check. Okay, nothing. I think that I'll have to do that later on when I'm not hooked up to a streaming sound thing. So that's the other type here, is that we have this. Now, in terms of other issues that we might want to be dealing with, say we want to use some of our cool MIDI effects on an audio track. Well, right now, you'll see on these tracks there's no place to put MIDI effects. And 9 times out of 10, we don't even need to do that. I mean, there are some things here like velocity processor, which processes MIDI data, or the scripter, or even the randomizer, the note repeater, chord trigger modifier. All of these, there's really no reason to put them on audio tracks. There's only a couple things that ever make any sense at all. One of them would be the modulator, because that allows us to do really cool things with plugins. So let's talk about that for a second. So the arpeggiator, that's easy. That takes MIDI data, arpeggiates it, and pushes it onto the instrument. Some of these, and let's pull off the Octavox for a second, and let's see if I can somehow do sound again through all of this, if it lets me. It hates me. There we go. Okay, you should be hearing sound with that now. It looks like I've got levels. And so this is the other piece to the MIDI effects. So let's do the modulator. And instead of controlling the MIDI data that I'm sending via my keyboard, instead of doing that, it can do other things. So for instance, I can learn a plugin parameter. And then let's do this with the mix here. So I touch that knob, and now this LFO shape is controlling that plugin parameter. So this is still a MIDI function because Logic uses MIDI type data to do things like automation. And so what we're looking at is this thing sending out that data, and instead of going into the instrument, it's bypassing the actual notes that we would be playing, and is controlling parameters. So like control data, continuous control data. And then I can change this around and do randomize. And then I can make it, do other crazy stuff like go faster. Okay. Or go slower, or change shapes, or do random sample and hold type things. There's just a lot we can do with this, and so I think it becomes really interesting. Let's relearn a different thing here, such as, let's see, I want to do right there. Let's do our cutoff frequency. Oh, I just like that type of effect. So this thing is going into that. And this is where it would be really cool to have this modulator available on audio tracks, because then I could control things like equalization or other parameters on an audio track that it's going through. But we could, do similar things. One of the easiest ways to do this with audio track would be something like if we put on a compressor. Let's put on a compressor for a second. And let's not worry about the threshold or ratio or anything like that. But let's do a side chain, and let's choose like an audio track, right? Or a live input or whatever. And then we put an equalizer after it. And with this equalizer, let's raise up one of these things. And we'll open up that modulator one more time, and we'll say, you know what, learn a plugin parameter, and let's do a frequency. So now the side chain is used to bring in the audio from another track. We mute the other track at the other place, so it's not two places at once. We essentially turn off all the other functionality of the compressor. We have an EQ here, and then we use the modulator to do that. This works well when we're using all effects, but if we want to do this with panning, then we have to do this a different way using the environment, because panners are not included. It's just the things on the inserts. So for instance, if I say learn plugin parameter, and I click on the panner down here, and nothing happens. And so it just doesn't work. We can't do it on other tracks. So for instance, sometimes I wish we could say learn plugin parameter and choose something on a different track and have that work, but it doesn't work either. So we are stuck with things on the track itself and not able to route this inter-track or onto other types of tracks, etc. Okay, so that's the core of these different types of effects. They're all useful in different ways, and I think that it's nice that we have a lot of options. At the same time, we're so close to like having all this flexibility that we just don't have yet, and so we're always hoping that they'll expand some of these tools to make them more universally usable across all the different track types in Logic, instead of just making them, really narrow kind of use thing. And so that's kind of what we're looking at. Any questions? I know we have a few people here now. We have, a dozen. Any questions from anybody about what I just shared, or anything related to effects, or shoot anything at all? This is a good time to ask. There's about, I would say, a 4 second delay or so from when I say things to when you actually start to type, and then a few seconds to type. So I'll give you about 5 or 6 seconds. Um, Otherwise, this was a pretty focused stream and covering pretty much what we have. Um, you're welcome, Norman and Amir. That's okay. Blanking on questions. That's fine. Um, you know, I like doing the live stream stuff because it takes the pressure off of, figuring out an exact video thing. I have been making a bunch of videos. I made a few last week, and it's interesting. This channel, that my viewers really like tips and tricks, and just sticking right to the information. Anytime we get philosophical, there's kind of a revolt. But I love throwing some gas on the fire when it comes to talking about, Logic and Apple. I'm not an employee of Apple, so I'm not a beta tester of Apple, so I can say whatever the hell I want, and I can't get in trouble as long as I don't, insult anybody personally. And so I like to say stuff about it, and my feelings are strong. I use Logic regularly, but I've used a lot of workstations over the years, and there aren't any. I mean, I could use any of them and learn how to get what I wanted done. Um, but I certainly like Logic more than most. And so I think that that's an interesting thing. I don't really care for Pro Tools, although Pro Tools' latest update, apart from the subscription model, which is very controversial, but the future of everything, because they've discovered that if they tell everyone that's what's going to happen, then that's what's going to happen. But aside from that, they did some cool things with audio to MIDI that I wish Logic had. I wish I could take a piano recording, drop it on track, right click on it, say convert to MIDI, and it did a full transcription into MIDI of every note, and that's cool. That's really cool. Norman, I'm sorry you're stuck with 10.4. New computers are the price of admission to Logic in many ways. I think everyone talks about the subscription model that Pro Tools has, and I think of Logic's subscription model, which you wouldn't call it that normally, but the subscription model is a new computer every couple of years, and so if you think about it, you're probably paying more for Logic if you follow that model than if you go to Pro Tools. So the new computer thing, that's tricky. But I mean, I come from a place of real fortunate circumstances with that, because I'm a professor and computers are part of my job, and so they update my computer for me. I have one of the new Mac Studio Ultras on order. It's been on order for about 5 weeks now. Maybe it'll come someday. I'm guessing another week or two, because when they bought it, it was 7 to 9 weeks, I think, was the backup log for the Ultras. But I'll be doing a bunch of videos on that when it comes. I'm using a Mac M1, which the university did not pay for me. During the pandemic, everyone was terrified of budgets because we had a lot of, who knew what was really going to happen. And so I bought the M1, which was very affordable. It's been very powerful. It was around $750. So that's a cheap computer if you already have monitors, a keyboard, and a mouse, and an audio interface, and all of that stuff. Cool. Well, without questions, this is kind of the tail material anyway. But thanks for the two of you making comments, and everyone else who's been watching. Um, Interesting stuff. I know we didn't get into too much of this. Let me perhaps share just one tip now at the very end of my favorite plugin tip that I've been using of late. Um, if you get in the habit of putting all of your EQs in the same channel slot. So when I say channel slot, I mean here, we have the visible ones. We have right now, I've got 6 visible slots on my inserts. They expand if you use more. But if you put the EQ in the same one, the compression in the same one, one nice thing you can do is when you do open the interface of one of them, there's this little locking mechanism in the top corner. And then I can just go through all my channels. If I click on the next one, it's going to open up the EQ for that. So I can really easily go through all of my EQs. And this is even nice when I have my iPad app open, which right now I'm using for the stream to make sure I can see questions. But if I have the app open, I can just go from one to the next. And it will show me all of those ones in the same slot. So for instance, if I go up here to this top slot and go over, then I'm going to go to compression next and then to pitch correction. So I didn't follow that particular advice on this current project, but sometimes when I'm doing like a big mix and I know that it's going to be a lot of effects and things, I will put all of those ones in the same slot, and even skip a slot if I need to keep them all the same. So that way, when I'm going through, I can just, select one of the channels and it'll take me to the EQ on that one, and I can just easily go through all of them. So a nice visual tip. This little thing essentially means that you're going to have one plugin interface open at a time, and as you change the different channels, it will just show that one as you go through. So for instance, if I come down here to this one, it's not going to show me EQ, it's going to show me an amp. Back to a compressor, and then something turned off on this one. My NX. Cool. But then you can close that out and do that. So it's a nice way to be able to see all of your plugins in an easy way as you're really quickly scanning through things. Perhaps 2 other tricks here at the very end. One of them would be that, and you might know this, but you can click where this little empty, or where the EQ thumbnail is. You can click there and it will load the channel EQ. And because they're so related, if I switch this, let me do this. My mouse is stuck. There we go. Where did I put it? Right here, I think. 9. Yeah. So if I come here and I go to EQ and I say I want to use the linear phase instead, it will maintain your curves between those 2 EQs. So that's one thing. And then let's delete that. The other one would be where you have the little meter for the compressor. You can actually come through and say, you know what? I'm just going to click on it and we'll add the default Logic compressor into the next open insert. So it's real easy to get the a compressor added just by clicking on that. You don't have to search through it. You can get an EQ and a compressor right off the bat. Now this one, you'll see I can't do that. It has a little icon that pops up. That it means that this track is frozen, and so I can't add things to it, but that's cool. So, Gigadeath, how you doing? Thanks for the super chat. You're amazing. Group effects. So you can switch them on and off at the same time. Well, let me show you with the group options what you can group together. And so this would tell you right off the bat a little bit about that. And you'll see that we don't have anything. I think sends are on here and the other stuff, but I don't think you can actually group those in the same way. But let me see one thing. I've been curious about this as well because I was messing with this for a video not too long ago. Yeah, so you can do the quick groups, and we should try an official group here in a second, even though it isn't written there. But if I do like a selection of things, just click on the first one, shift click on the last one, and then I just do the power for those. It'll do all of them simultaneously for everything that's in the quick group. So that's one way you can do it. Just trying to think. No, I was gonna say the sends on fader, but that's not for the inserts. That's definitely just for the sends. I mean, I've done videos about this in the past. It's probably time to do a reminder video. But the sends on fader allow us to put our sends up here, the little knob and button down on our fader, so we can do easy changes to headphone mixes or reverb sends, which are kind of nice. But I think the quick clutch would be the main way to do that. And what do you mean by how to toggle between channel? Are you asking how you can, move the selection from one channel to the next one besides just clicking on it? While you're answering that question, let's do group one for 3 different things here. So now those ones go up and down together. And let's just power those on. Nope. So grouping them does not do that with that, but the quick group does. And then switching between 2 tracks, I don't know if there's, let's look real quick. I don't use a keyboard shortcut for this. But I do use my iPad app all the time for this. So let me check the key commands real quick. And I think select channel. There probably is a select next channel maybe. Let's hope, maybe. We'll see. Oh, does that not go bigger? There we go. Set selected channel to automation mode. Remove. Okay, so select audio channel strips. There's a warning on that. I don't know what that means. Does not work because there's a system preference. Okay, cool. So I think that's doing all of them anyway. So here is the one right there. So I guess it's just the arrow keys. Interesting. I've never done this because I don't. Let's close this down for a second. Yeah, I guess it's just the right arrow key goes to the next one. One is the other one is hot. Check. Okay. So I hope that answers your question. It looks like just the arrow keys back and forth lets you switch between tracks. So for instance, if I have this one open and I have that locked into that mode, I can just do the right arrow. No, I have to, oh, that's annoying. You have to select down into the mixer window to do that. Why is that not doing that? It's still doing regions. This is probably why I don't do it this way, because that is a huge pain in the butt. So it has to be in the keyboard focus. For those of you who don't know or never really pay attention, when Windows have the blue line box around that window, that means it's accepting the window focused keyboard shortcuts. So I just was having the top one selected right there, and then my arrows select regions on the selected track. But if I come down here and select this window, come on, then the arrows will move between the tracks, and I can see all of my effects on that one row. So what a pain. So I don't use it that way. So for instance, I'm going to open up my Logic Remote app for a second. I keep my iPad in front of me most of the time, and I'm using the screen here and just scrolling through. When I'm doing projects where I need that. Otherwise, if I have the mouse in my hand, I'm just selecting it with my finger like this. But if I have this open, I mean, this is so nice to be able to just hit the screen and go to that track. And, you know, you can do the audio effects and open it up here. I opened it up, the plugin on my iPad, and it doesn't open it up on the screen. So I don't know. I wish that would change. I wish that if I opened one on my iPad, it would open up on the screen. But I'm looking down at the iPad anyway at that point. 5-Ash Art. There was a comment you made a few minutes ago, which was held for review, even though there's nothing controversial about it. I just haven't had time to click the show button. Probably because you said the word ass. But you make a good point. Logic is still such a pain in the ass every time you do some sort of update. Oh my gosh, the third-party stuff, that's tricky. I feel like we should stick with the audio unit version that's stable for longer. And Apple's like, we're just going to update it. I mean, it's in the documentation. Didn't all you developers read it? And it's like, come on, just don't make them look bad all the time. Just stick with a stable version. But for a lot of reasons, they can't always. Cool. Anything else before we pull the plug on this? Thanks, Gigadeath, again for your super chat. I think I'm going to go buy an ice cream with that money. Because it's like, I don't know how the weather is where you all are. Everybody tell me how your weather is. I'm curious. I'm loading up my weather in Denver. Today's only going to be 93 degrees. And I'll tell you what that is in... I don't know, how do I change my... Sure, I do it right there. Got it. So it's going to be today, it'll be 34 degrees. Tomorrow's going to be 99 Fahrenheit or 37 degrees Celsius. And then Sunday is going to be 100 degrees or 38 degrees Celsius. And that's hot. That is super hot. Rainy in Germany. I'm coming. I just got back a couple weeks ago from the Czech Republic, and we had a layover in Germany, but man, I'm ready to move to Europe. I'm ready. So let's see how it is in Prague where it was. It's not raining there right now, but it's 69 degrees. Chilly. Nice. Norman says hot in Florida. Yes. But it's like always hot in Florida. Even when it's cool, it's still hot. Like humid. The humid. Here, it's a really nice dry heat at least. I don't go outside and sweat. I mean, you do sweat a little bit if you're in 100 degrees, but not that much. Surprisingly little sweat. Well, we've digressed. Thanks again to everybody. And I'm looking over here at the comments now because I closed my iPad. And we'll be doing, I'm going to keep the live streams going. I think this is my favorite part of my channel is connecting with some of you and answering questions and discussing. I like that many times more. I just got to find a good routine time that I can do it. The summertime is brutal because kids are out of school and I've got kids. And so got to do it when they're sleeping during nap time or, sitting in their rooms on timeout. Just kidding. But seriously. But we'll find some times to do some more of these. So stay tuned and thanks again. And I'm going to pull the plug on this. I'll see you all later.